So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Darlene. Darlene Machell Espena is a cultural historian of post-colonial Southeast Asia, specializing on dance, cinema, nation building, and the Cold War. She is currently an assistant professor of humanities in the School of Social Sciences and the Office of Core Curriculum at the Singapore Management University. Thank you and welcome, Darlene.
The world of politics is a world in constant movement. Bodies in motion are continuously visible in collective spaces, performing politics, articulating the political and interrogating power. Political ideas are also in constant movement, continuously percolating into new and various forms of expression and practices. One of such practices where bodies in motion and political ideals are entangled is dance. A very good morning, afternoon, and evening to you all. It is a pleasure to share some key findings emerging from my study on Cambodia's Royal Ballet Company during Sihanouk's time from 1955 to 1970. Essentially, this work is an attempt to contribute to the fields of dance and Cold War studies, really by probing into the place of Khmer dance in Cambodian politics and diplomacy during the Cold War. My goal in the study is to offer not only an examination of the cultural dimension of the Cold War politics and nation building, but really an analysis of how Khmer dance choreographed Cambodia's nascent ideas of in search for national identity, modernity, and autonomy in an international context dominated by the rivalry between two great powers. Now, given the limited time that I have for this presentation, I thought I would just share three emerging themes or arguments based on the data that I have thus far. These three themes are essentially three ways to look at the performances of the Khmer Royal Ballet Company. First, as a choreography of the post-colonial Khmer nation. Second, as a diplomatic tool to establish friendship and goodwill with other Asian states in Asia. And then third, as a performance of the neutral stance that defined Cambodia's Cold War policy during Sihanouk's rule. Now, it is important to note that the period I'm studying really is the end of the Second World War, when a new era in Southeast Asian decolonization and nation building emerged. Newly independent and sovereign nations began to navigate the international arena with a renewed sense of political confidence and national identity. In the case of Cambodia, this renewed national and post-colonial spirit was in fact embodied and reinforced in the Khmer dance. The elegant performances of dancers in jeweled costumes floating on stage, reminiscent of the deities of the bas-relief of Angkor Wat, became a focal part of entertaining foreign diplomatic visitors in by Cambodian officials overseas. Various Asian delegations, including heads of state, visited Phnom Penh in the 50s and 60s and were treated to and enamored by the performances of the Royal Ballet Company. These performances were not only meant to introduce and accentuate Khmer cultural prowess and antiquity to these Asian leaders, but really also served as a crucial platform for Cambodia's cultural Cold War diplomacy with its Asian neighbors. For my first point, classical dance was utilized to embody a renewed self-confidence and identity of the new Khmer nation. These performances really were more than just a means to entertain the foreign audience, but were perceptively conducted as a way of legitimizing the idea of a new modern Cambodia. Both within Cambodia, in the domestic audience, and of course in the international setting. Now, dance has always preoccupied a special place in Cambodia's history, society, and politics. Ever since the 9th century, dance performances were meant as offerings, or really as a way for the king to communicate with the gods and their ancestors. The history of the royal court dance in Cambodia really also followed the rise itself of the Khmer Empire. Now, suffice to note at this point that the tradition of dance survived and acquired a new ethos in post-colonial Cambodia. This new ethos reflects Cambodia's desire and efforts towards a new Khmer identity, one that is modern, inclusive, and yet deeply rooted in its glorious Angkorian past. Now, we saw this in several instances. First, in Queen Kosomak's efforts to revive and really reform the royal Khmer dance in the post-colonial period. Queen Kosomak was a mother of Prince Sihanouk. Now, she understood the role of dancers as cultural ambassadors. So in post-colonial Cambodia, she ensured that there were enough resources, she trained new dancers, but really more importantly, she made extra effort to distinguish Khmer gestures from Siamese choreography. In Sihanouk's films, dance had a prominent place. Now, Sihanouk was not just a prince, a politician, he was also an avid filmmaker. He made films specifically to construct a cosmopolitan image of Cambodia with its new buildings, paved streets, nice cars, and Western influences. Now, in these films, dance performances were in fact included, reinforcing the image both be modern while maintaining its traditions like dance, known as the spirit of Khmer. Now, in this new modern Cambodia, the role of the royal family also remained evident. We see this in the dance as well. In the Royal Ballet Company, the prima ballerina herself was the princess, the daughter of Prince Sihanouk, Princess Bupa Devi. Now, I also want to point out that in 1963, at the Southeast Asian Cultural Festival held in Singapore, the Sihanouk chose the Royal Ballet Company to represent Cambodia. Now, I don't have time to explain more on that, but I'll be happy to elaborate on that point later on. Now, for my second point, these performances were deployed as diplomatic tool to establish goodwill and solidarity in the Asian region and really beyond. Now, no visit to Cambodia was complete without witnessing a performance of the Royal Ballet Company. Lee Kuan Yew visited in 1962, Aichiro Fujiyama from Japan visited in 1959, among others, and they all saw performances of the Royal Ballet Company. Dance as a diplomatic tool was also evident in the emergence of friendship dance in the 50s and 60s. United States, thanking them for the new road that they built in Cambodia. Another friendship dance was performed for the USSR, thanking them for the modern hospital that they donated, they built in Cambodia. And then another friendship dance for China. So essentially, these are all friendship dances for these great powers. Now, dance as a diplomatic tool was also evident in the way each dance program was curated and modified to suit the interests and message that Sihanouk wanted to express to the specific audience. Specific performances were meticulously planned, and new choreography and dances were in fact even invented or recreated. A couple of examples here. During the Indian President Rajendra Prasad's visit in Cambodia, performances were specifically tailored to appeal to the shared culture and heritage between Cambodia and India. Performances based on the Ramayana, or known in Cambodia as the Ryamkher, were in fact selected. Another example would be the creation of a new dance, The Legend of Enuma, which was a creation of Queen Kosomak herself, was performed specifically to welcome the Indonesian President Sukarno when he visited the country in 1959. Now, according to Princess Bupa Devi, selected a Malay story from Java in Indonesia because it was where Sukarno was from. Now, this reveals really a deliberate effort to reinvent or recreate a tradition and indeed a ritual for specific political or diplomatic reasons. Now, dance as a diplomatic tool was not simply symbolic. The idea of royal dance as a ritual for pragmatic, not simply symbolic reason is in fact captured in Princess Bupa Devi's words in an interview with Paul Cravath. Here she said, with correct training and technique, our dance rituals bring blessings to our king, harmony to the governance of our land, and prosperity to our people. The dancers accomplished this by embodying the essence of purity and strength of our Khmer race. This art empowers them to earn these blessings. So, in other words, performing royal dance is supposed to empower the king and his governance. It allows him to advocate for and achieve the interests of his people. And of course, royal dance balances the universe. And when performed in front of dignitaries, in fact, performed perfectly, precisely in front of dignitaries from other Asian states, it fosters goodwill and solidarity. Now, finally, my third point, dance as a performance of Cambodia's Cold War stance, which is non-alignment or neutrality. Thomas Abercrombie, who is an American writer, visited Cambodia. And in his write-up for the National Geographic in 1964, he vividly recounts his experience watching a performance by the Khmer dancers. He wrote, Angkor's sculptures seemed to come to life as the royal ballet swept in from the shadows. From a silver cup, they tossed white rose petals, and the royal party singing, "We are members of a great family of Asian nations. Each petal is a wish for happiness." Now, this loaded message really fully captures Cambodia's regional and international outlook during the Cold War. What emerges out of this is a deliberate attempt, deliberate accounting, both symbolic and constructive, of Cambodia's objective of peaceful coexistence among a family of nations. The act of tossing petals and singing or wishing for happiness mobilizes the body as an instrument to construct this neutrality. Now, this neutrality was also seen, in fact, in the principles of the dance itself. I don't have time to elaborate, but the Apsara dancer, for example, cannot show his or her teeth, and the bending of the arms and fingers demonstrates flexibility, but movements that are also highly regulated. I think this is in fact captured in George Grosley's remark about the Khmer dancer. Here he wrote, her face remains serious and impassive, flexible and trained. The very same flexibility, I argue, the very same neutrality that is apparent is evident in Cambodia's Cold War policy. I will stop here. Thank you. This is the end of my presentation. Happy to take in questions later on.